Hi, this is Richard from Regenerative, and I'm joined by Jon Foster-Pedley, who's the Dean of the Henley Business School, and he's going to speak to us today about some of the dynamics with designing a strategy and how it might impact upon the development of a sustainable type business. Thanks for joining us today, Jon.
Oh, it's a total pleasure, Richard. I'm very keen on things regenerative and sustainable, although mainly in a business kind of context. So I'm also fascinated by the work you're doing. So really good to see you again.
Thank you very much. I've heard in some of our previous discussions you talking about having some involvement in some sustainable initiatives in Africa. Is there much going on at the moment in that space?
Yes, a lot. I'm in Johannesburg, and our business school behind me, you can see, is in Johannesburg and Cape Town. We started something recently called Henley Earth, Environmental Activism Through Research and Training at Henley. We love our acronyms. We're going to be involved in a TED Countdown, a TEDx presentation, which I'll be setting up, I hope, in October, November, and trying to get a bit close to what's going on with COP as well. And generally, I've been following, but not involved, particularly in Extinction Rebellion. I'm fascinated by how movements build and how you create massive movements across countries of people with sort of distributed power and creating momentum. So the idea of movements fascinates me a lot. And in many ways, a business is a movement rather than an institution, but we can talk more about that. So yes, so we're getting there. We're starting to pick it up, yeah. But we're big polluters in South Africa. Per capita, I think we've got one of the highest carbon footprints because we're so dependent on coal powers and things.
So what are some of the projects that you have been involved in and they're going to be discussed in that TEDx presentation?
Well, I don't know at the moment. So the TED Countdown has got a lot of collateral, which they've gathered from great speakers around the world. So you can set up one of these. Say, why don't you do it? You can set up one of these yourself. You take down the collateral, get a bunch of people, and it's all about, reducing carbon footprint by 50% by 2030. And it's building an initiative to do that. So you can use the collateral you've got, or you can use local ones as well. We're going to take I suppose, a perspective about thinking broadly about the nature of how you get people engaged with these things and what is the languaging you need to get people motivated and how not to put people off. I just gave a presentation at Henley Forum in the UK, or from here, last week, about our sustainable initiatives as well. And I talked quite a bit about how you need to think carefully about not to doomsay and put people off or to bury them in jargon, but how you have to paint narratives and stories that are positive and constructive. It's like Yuval Noah Harari talks about in his books, Homo sapiens, Amadeus, and 21 Lessons, 21st Century. He talks a lot about the meta-narratives and meta-stories that bring people together. And I think the meta-story about climate change and regeneration is very well understood by people in it, but it's not easily presented to people outside it. It either seems a little bit on the edge of the normal distribution, it's an outlier, or it just doesn't have a narrative that resonates with people in what they say their normal job is. Maybe more so in New Zealand and other countries. I think you're very definitely there. But in other places where everyone's scrabbling for work, where you've got a lot of poverty, people are desperate for employment, the idea of what's going on with regenerative business and regenerative practices is second to I need to get some food and get an electricity or whatever it is. So we need to change the nature of the economic system we're sitting in, and it's hard to talk about that when you have such egregious differences in living standards and opportunity for people.
That underlying narrative I find quite interesting. In my work with regenerative agriculture, there's always a lot of talk about how you define regenerative agriculture and what is the parameters about how you frame that up and how that involves the research you do and what is regenerative and what is not. But I was thinking how that underlying narrative that the whole of society is moving through as to being more engaged and thinking of initiatives that create that more sustainable future, how that acts as a driver in many different industries, really. And when you're trying to frame up how it looks like in those particular industries, it might be more meaningful in a way just to recognize that it is a driver that is almost like a new ideology that's embraced widely throughout society, that is driving all industries towards that future that we're all looking for, as to how we can live more in balance with the earth and its resources.
Well, I think in Africa, we come from very different societies. We've got a history of colonialization and people taken out of their communities into forced regions. We had apartheid. We had people living in mining camps for most of their lives and seeing their families 2-3 times a year or whatever. So it's a very hard thing to engage with. But there are a couple of things that really matter. What's happened so without thinking about the environment for a second, let's think about some of the deeper causes. Inequity of any sort creates unfairnesses in society, and unfairnesses create poverty. So when you have businesses whose short-term ends are about making profits, and they can cut off they don't pay the consequence, they don't pay the tax on damage to the environment. If they damage the environment, the government's supposed to pick it up, but actually the people do, or people who don't have any money pick it up and push further into poverty. So what that creates is dynamics in society that in themselves move away from creating any form of regeneration, because what you have is a whole load of people left out. And if you come to them and say, we have to live in balance with nature, and you've got, in South Africa, the highest Gini coefficient in the world, which is the biggest difference between rich and poor, you've got 9.3 million people living in Soweto, just outside Johannesburg. And a lot of those don't have a lot. And so while the spirit is great, and the other thing that happens in the cultures like ours, we've been through a very difficult time with corruption. So what's happened is we've had what's called state capture. Part of, one political power has taken power and been taking vast amounts of money offshore, being colluding with dark forces. And you can read about this in the process of state capture, capturing the state organs, including the National Prosecuting Authority, the Secret Service, the police, all the press, the judiciary. All these people, in one way or another, have been infiltrated. And so there's a massive imbalance. So if you've got a pot of money, if you've got $100 million or $1 billion sitting here, then, of $1 billion, 100 million, 200 million will go into the wrong pocket. So you've only got 800 million to spend, and it's taxpayers' money. And then that money will be given to very bad suppliers who will use bad tools, bad business, and they will use, I haven't got any interest at all in sustainable practice. So you end up with $1 billion being, half of that being wasted and stolen and taken to Dubai or whatever, and then the rest of it being put into very poor circumstances. So we have to change the narrative from just living in touch with nature, into thinking much more about what are our children growing up into. How do we create a more just society that's better governed so the money is there? And then how do we take people out of sheer poverty into more prosperous environments? And it's at that point that we can start having a narrative about, let's be a bit more regenerative. You can start saying it's going to be less waste. It's going to be closer to tradition. You're not going to be taking everything from country. The air you breathe, all our air is going to be, our commons is going to be better. The water that we're pressured with is now going to be better understood. And the inequities force people away from thinking about broad issues. It narrows people's focus. So my position is, if you want to do regeneration, you really, really have to work on the basic dynamics of society and how businesses work. And they need to be efficient. You can't cause a consequence and not put it into your balance sheet. So, while we have triple bottom line and all those sort of things, we need to make it a little bit more visceral. It's still abstract. People don't understand why they need to do that. And they think, it's a complex problem for us, but we're working through it. It's a long answer. Sorry.
I see same societal issues in New Zealand too. They might not be as extreme, but there's definitely that recognition of, that reconciliation of some of the past issues in society need to be addressed and integrated into the context of how you're trying to move forward in a sustainable way to be able to make that progress. Otherwise, you're kind of still held back by those underlying issues that can't enable you to collaborate collectively to move forward and to embrace those new concepts that we want to do.
Yeah.
What does it look like in a business context? okay, so you might have those aspirations to do things more sustainably, but then you've got all those other issues that you need to address too. You talked about considering the impact on different groups of society.
Well, the first thing we need to do is really work against, and this might seem bizarre to you that I'm talking about these things in the context of regeneration, but we have to get governance right. We have to get the little bit of money we have to use it well, and we have to get rid of people who take it away and siphon it out of the economy, so we have more money to spend. And then we have to think about, well, how do we spend that money more equitably? And how do we get money, education to people who need it? How do we get housing to people who need it? How do we get water and sanitation to people who need it? And that changes the dynamic of the society, and it also changes the dynamic of people who are in businesses. So they're not just focused on their own profit and their own short-term ends and desperate to make that happen, but the people within the organization start to change their perspective of where they are as citizens and in society. And as they change their perspectives away from the boundaries of business and their own balance sheets to the communities they work in, and then it changes the way they think about what business is. And they start thinking of business as not about profit and profiteering, but about mutual prosperity. And they start to understand that in a poor country like that, you can't build prosperity. You'll only ever fracture and break unless you make it more equitable. And as you make it more equitable, then you can start talking about how we use the commons well. And then you can have the dialogue about, well, how do we get water, electricity, and how do we use alternative energies? And so the foundation of this is the macro system we're living in, the pure old capitalistic system, the very Milton Friedman-esque, pay off your stakeholders and make a profit and a fair profit, etc., to moving towards the things like people like Colin Mayer talk about. Colin Mayer was the dean of Said Business School and is a professor there. No, he wasn't a dean, he's a professor there, but wrote a very good book called Prosperity. And he then unpacks corporate law to show how you can move the governance of business away from profit towards mutual prosperity and purpose. And because people think the purpose of a business is to make a profit. Everyone says, what's the business for? Yes, make profit. And it just isn't. I mean, profit is a healthy consequence of doing business well. I mean, what happens is you create something people want, it helps their lives, they give you money for it, and because the value you get more money back, you pay off to your the people who've invested in you, you've got some surplus, which we call profit, you invest it back in the business to improve the value you give society. And you pay off people, and you change the way of, and you don't have these appalling differences between CEOs and the basic employee. So it's a bit like what the Danes talk about. And the Danes have a very balanced and fair society, but they're very like the Kiwis actually, and New Zealanders. If you're not fair with people, if you don't treat people as equals, then they don't really have a lot of time for you as a human being. And the whole society starts to be based on that. We've got a very unequal society, and many others do. So I think you've got to start changing the dynamics of the way businesses run, the way governments run. And that means it has to be citizen movements. It has to be people like you and I who are starting to stand up, tell different narratives and paint a different picture about business.
In the business context, I'm just wondering how they keep track of that. Like with the Milton Friedman model, it seems the appeal of that is if you just focus on productivity, you don't know all the different dynamics in the society of how it might impact those other elements of society. But if you're making a profit and that profit's feeding back into society, it's going to mutually benefit everyone without even knowing what those dynamics are. If you're embracing that more collective approach and considering all the different impacts that you might have on society and how all those collective things can be part of what you monitor and as part of your strategy in your business, how do you keep track of all those loose ends and report upon it and integrate it into your business strategy?
Well, there we open a whole can of worms about what strategy is. And if you listen to somebody like Henry Mintzberg, who's a very famous professor of strategy from McGill, who's written a number of books like Managers Not MBAs, and I'm a great fan of his, and I run an MBA school. He will say that you can't teach a lot of these things in MBAs, and that a lot of management practice is is muddling through. It's not organized in a way that our intellect and our ideology tells us it has to be. In fact, it creates these enormous schisms between our lived realities and these sort of archetype of management practices that are portrayed as almost religious kind of rites. In fact, managing organizations is very, very different from that. It's, you know, especially when you're managing in change, it's very hard to predict. It's very hard to plan. It's very hard to get decent feedback. A lot of things happen that you don't know, and you've got to look for the unintended consequences and the subtle thing. You got to catch them early. And the classic sort of organization can't do that very well. And the classic mindset, managerial mindset that we are conditioned to do so, it's a dogma. It is almost it's almost a fundamentalism about business that you have to be that sort of command and control approach. But we can really change that. If you want to be innovative and creative, you want to get early, quick feedback, you have to change the dynamics of business and the structures and the attitudes and the aspirations and the aims and what you think you're doing. If you're obsessed with profit, then you're self-obsessed. If you're looking at prosperity and common good and 7 generations of good for our children, then your mindset is quite different. You know, quite different indeed from what it would have been if you're, you know, thinking I've got to get this company on the stock market, and the stock market has these short-term ends. So what I'm saying is that we are facing now a really interesting fundamental transition from the old capitalist models to new forms of business that we have to have if we're going to keep the planet sane, and that are going to allow us to make the things we need to make and keep the society and medicine and healthcare, everything going. So we're going to have our wits and our science with us, but we're just going to have to govern them in quite different ways with different aims, and we're going to have to think differently about who we are in our lives on the planet.
I've heard of someone describe it as an emergent business strategy where you don't know necessarily what everything is going to be, but you've got to enter into that narrative and discussion and exploration but you don't know quite what the end point will be. You've got to kind of maintain the dynamics of the business and the profitability, and you've got to still record things, but you got to be aware that there's this other emergent transition in society, and we don't quite know what the outcome of all that is, and we just got to be willing to engage in that process of
well, let's talk about strategy a bit, because I mean, Mintzberg, and I've worked with complexity theorists and I've taught strategy for years, and then I started to run a business school and I had to use strategies, and we've been, thank goodness, really successful. When I say successful, we've created value for a lot of people, and we've made enough profit to reinvest and stay alive, and we've done it all off our own revenue. So we've had 1,200% growth over the last few years, and we have 4,500 students from about a few hundred before, and so we've been successful. But there are 5 strategy approaches that Mintzberg talks about, and you can read them up. He talks about the classic planned approach, which is a command and control. I can see the future, the CEO can see the future, therefore the CEO and the team are best positioned to make a plan, and then the plan is coherent. I've got to get people to buy into it, so I sell it to them. I do the mission, vision, do the internal, external analysis, the SWOT, then create the KPIs, cascade them throughout the organization. I get people to buy in, and then I monitor it, get feedback. But that's fine. It just doesn't work it doesn't work if the people at the top can't see what the future is. And if you ask people, senior people now, can they see the future? Well, can we? Obviously not, because the whole world's been turned upside down in the last year, and that wasn't actually a particularly improbable thing to happen. It was forecast and foreseen, as were the crash of 2008. And, many people saw these things. So that planning works as long as the CEOs can see best and you're willing to get people to concede. But then you can choose, he's got another P, which you take a position in the market. And so you kind of, it's like there's an ecosystem in the market. I'm going to differentiate myself, and I'm going to be like Toyota, and here's Alfa Romeo. And so I've each got my little niche. And the third P is ploy. Think of strategy as a ploy, a maneuver to outwit fooling my competitors, just getting the edge on them, all the stuff out of Sun Tzu, with his, all his stuff about, everyone sees the tactics by which I win the battles and nobody sees the strategy by which I win the war, that sort of idea. And then a very interesting one where he talks about perspective. And a perspective is simply a worldview. And by making a decision based on the way you think about life and how you think about people, you're continually reinforcing these same sort of actions. If you decide in regenerative agriculture, you're going to give value to people, which is allowing them to turn their gardens into food places and small sanctuaries in life that when they go into, a bit like a Zen garden, they get a spiritual uplift by seeing a balance and a harmony and an interplay. It's a microcosm of what can be created out there, and they get food. It's educative, it's enriching, it's beautiful. And then you make decisions in your house and your garden that are completely about that ideology. And you create these systems, these activity systems that are self-reinforcing. Now that's a really interesting way to look at strategy, but it's not planned, it's kind of emergent. And then there's the idea, even more emergent, he calls about patterns. You have a plan, you're going there, but things are happening. Life is what happens when you're making other plans, as John Lennon used to say. But all these things happening, so you react to them. And so in order not to, if you carried on toward that goal, you would die. But because all these changes have happened, like we had to, COVID came along. If we'd started to do classroom teaching again, we would have died. So we switched to virtual teaching 2 weeks before we locked down. We had it all waxed because we had good predictive abilities. And we've switched into virtual learning for the last 420 days and met our margins and kept our business going. And we've employed more people in a face-to-face business. So it's been, and that's a pattern. And what happens then is you make decisions and you don't know you've created the pattern until you look behind you. You say, oh, we keep doing this sort of thing. And you say, yeah, that's an emergent strategy. And you say, oh, we should do more of that. Yeah, that worked. And so it's very different. It's very different from like monolithically going on in this planning direction as against being able to be adaptable, lean, very aware. But if you're too adaptable, if you don't have a vision or purpose, you could wander everywhere. So there's your planned strategy. There's your emergent strategy. They fight each other here. And then you get a sort of realized strategy in a third position, and which wasn't your target, but is actually a very good place to be. And if you work like this, you can't work in the old classic textbook way of doing strategy. You have to have different attributes. You have to set up your mind differently. And, and then you need to you have to understand what the basic purpose of the business is. And I can share a little bit of stuff about a business model with a slide if you want me to, but I don't know if that's what you want to.
Yeah, because I'm very curious about the process and methodology of how it's applied, because it does sound complex and there's a lot of moving parts there. And for a business manager to consider all those different moving dynamics that are going on and then apply it within some structure as they are working through it. And there sounds like there's a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of emergent outcomes that you don't quite predict when you first start out. How can you kind of navigate that dynamic and what maybe structures will help?
Well, think of this. Everybody, when you want to do strategy, they open the textbook and say, well, I better have a mission, I better have a vision, and I better have a sort of big BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. And then I better do some external analysis and internal analysis. And you get all these books and consulting, and then you bring it together with a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And from that, you kind of work out the direction you should go. And that's a very comforting process. And actually, I think, and one of my sort of mentors, who is Dr. Ralph Stacey, who's a very famous complexity theorist, written many books, and I worked with him, would say that all that is an anxiety-reducing device for corporate managers. It gives them the illusion that they're in control, and the illusion that they're in control is enough to allow them to keep them sane and going forward. I'm being slightly flippant, but the reality of life is it's muddling through. So, but that's fine, because we're very good at doing that. And if you realize that you can't predict that easily, and you've got to be prepared and adapt, you then set up the conditions in your organization for adaptability. You flatten your hierarchies, you improve the communication, you learn about design thinking, for example, and you get people very aware of what's going on. You notice well, you observe well, you record well, and you record the things you expect, particularly you record the unintended consequences of your action. you have to do that. So you have to police your mind. You can't have sort of too many cognitive biases or prior hypotheses, kind of errors in your head. You have to understand that. You have to keep yourself looking. You have to make reality your friend. And these are disciplines. And it's what I'm saying is that the real art of strategy is not about practices or frameworks. It's about inner disciplines. Now, I know that you are a black belt taekwondo, so you would know a lot about these things, you know, the disciplines you have to keep your perceptions open. And they're very similar. You know, I spent years doing meditative practices in my 20s, living in a sort of Hindu ashram. You know, unfortunately, I've forgotten most of it, but thank God I did it, because it's given me, you know, a practice of stilling my inner chatter and calming my fears so I can see what's really happening. And that's a gift that practices gave me. So you have to work on yourself. The heart of all strategy is you. It's not some model. And you can improve your ability to predict. So if I were to share the screen for a second, I just wanted to show you something from a really good book by Tetlock and Gardner called Super Forecasting. Can I do that, or would that
yes,
be?
thank you. That's great.
So I'll see if I can make this work. Okay, there we are. So this is these strategy ideas I've just been showing. See that there? There's 5 strategies. And Henry, can you see that slide about Henry Winsberg?
Yes, okay.
So that's you can go and read these things. That's why this is useful. It actually legitimizes you to be a bit more creative when you think of strategy this way. You can you start to think of yourself as a apprentice of strategy, not a corporate master. So anyway, if we move on from this and we think about what a business model is. So, you know, quite often you know, if you're going to have your own business, we need 3 things, I think. One is you need a vision, and excuse me, a vision is something you imagine. And so if you want to imagine, well, you better practice imagining. You know, business seems so rational and so compelled to think always about rationality and, you know, coherence, and you better be very, very professional and responsible. So imagination is stigmatized, but we need imagination. If you're going to have a vision, you need to cultivate your imagination, you need to visualize. And really good leaders do that. And if you have a good vision, that's what you imagine, that's great. You also, from your vision, you need a strategy of what you want to build and how you do it. Now, it could be any one of those strategic approaches I've talked about, but you need to have something. But underlying it, you need this idea called a business model. And that's the way that on the system you have over a period of time to take the value you create from others and feed it back into something that generates value back into you and doesn't make you bankrupt, keeps you thriving, okay, and allows you to continually improve and grow, although limits to growth, obviously, what you do. Now, if you just have vision and a business model, then you'll lose direction because the strategy gives you direction. If you have a vision and strategy and no business model, then you'll lose all your money because you haven't thought out how to actually make the money. If you've got strategy and a business model, then you're not sustainable. You'll create some money, but you won't have a vision to see what's coming in the future. You won't be able to sense the future, and that's really, really important. So I think that if you want to be a very good strategist, you should think a little bit about how well do I perceive the future, and you know, most people's ability will excuse me, I just have that, I'm in a dusty place. They have about a 30% capacity to forecast future. That's the stats. Training gives you, but even teams put together, it's below 50%. So, you know, you make random choices. But if you have some characteristics, you can get your predictive ability up to around nearly 70%, which is massive in terms of being able to do things. You can, and these are sort of the 4 characteristics that are important to cultivate. So I would say these are strategic characteristics. One is just the stance you have in your mind that nothing is certain. There is nothing predetermined. Fate doesn't exist. And actually everything we deal with is too complex to fully understand. So you're always going to be working and discovering and learning as you go forward. And that gives you a sort of, you know, it lets you a bit adrift, but it gives you a certain freedom to experiment and learn. The next one is the thinking, open-minded thinking, curiosity, capacity to be self-critical. Numeracy is really important. And also the idea of candor. And candor isn't like rudeness. It's just like you and I talking to each other and being able to be absolutely honest about what's going on as two grown-up people with, you know, all the stuff that goes with that, good and bad. And then forecasting, the idea of making reality your friend, being pragmatic, the idea of dragonfly eyes. You know, if you've got 30 people in a room from different backgrounds with 30 lenses of seeing reality, if you can bring all those together, you've got a very rich understanding of your context. Whereas I'm very dogmatic. If I have strong opinions strongly held, then I'll be dogmatic. If I have strong opinions lightly held, then I'll be willing to hear others and move. Work with maybes, not definitely. Change your mind, check your own biases, you know, be each other's policeman. And then the work approach, the sense of growth, quality improvement, empathy, and resilience. If you cultivate these characteristics, the chances are you're sitting in a business that will be ahead of the game compared with others. You won't be so beaten up by changes, and you'll be able to see your opportunity to provide value quicker and easier than others, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah, thank you so much. I know too the time's getting a bit late. I know it's late there. Don't want to hold you up too long. I was thinking maybe to close with, firstly, maybe if you could recommend perhaps a resource people could go to find out more. I'm sure that there's a lot of depth to this business strategy that people could explore and get into. Do you have any particular resources you might recommend?
There are so many, but I would recommend this one. It says Keith Van der Hayden, excuse me. And this is what every time we work with entrepreneurs, we say, think of what your business is. You invent something. Society needs something. You invent something. You create some distinctive ways of doing it. Creates unique competitive value. You'll get results. You pay off the profit you'll reserve the shareholders, and keep feeding resources back into those distinctive, different things you do that give you your advantage. This is like a virtuous cycle. I would go back to very simple thinking, if you like, in terms of thinking about business. And why I'm saying this, if you want a regenerative business, if you want a sustainable business, you've got to think in terms of self-reinforcing systems. And at the very basic level, you need to stop stigmatizing profit. You need to reframe profit. And you need to think of profit as a healthy surplus. If you don't have profit, then you're somebody else's problem. You know, you're kind of like financially incontinent, and somebody else has got to clean up your mess. So, you know, use money well, never lose money, keep it going. Be sane and just keep producing value and focus on the value you do. So there's any number, so read up any number of resources. I'd happy to share more with you, but also I would look at something called the business model canvas, which is a very popular thing for entrepreneurs. And I'll show you very, very briefly, I'll show you that on one slide. Go and look up the business model canvas, which you'll be able to download from somewhere. And this allows you to, with a couple of people, go through your business. What are your partners? What are your key activities? What's your source? And this is your value proposition, not what you think the value is, but what you know the deep benefit is to your clients. So not what you think they ought to like, what they genuinely value. So read up Clayton Christensen and his work on jobs to be done. He died recently. Jobs to be done. It's a very subtle piece of work, and you can fill up these and it'll help you understand the nature of your business, and you'll be able to have a sustainable business. I don't mean in terms of necessarily the product, what you do, but if you want to create a movement for sustainable regenerative agriculture and societal change and world change, that thing's got to support itself somehow. So use the business tools, but use them in your context, and you know, that's what I would say. I'm sorry, I've talked a lot.
No, thank you. So that's really just honing into what the demands are of the market you hope to serve, isn't it? And how what you hope to produce, that there is a good market for it, and that it's actually addressing some of the pains and gains of the end users.
Yeah, sometimes people don't know what they want, and that's just the great Sony Walkman case study. So you go and do market research, It won't tell you what people really need. So also look up features, advantage, benefits, an old sales tool. You people sell the features or the advantages, but I buy the benefit. Why do I buy this? Why do I buy this cup here? I buy it because my wife likes, you can't see it, my wife likes sort of quite nice cups, and it keeps her happy. It's not because it's from Burj Khalifa in Dubai or whatever. It's just it's just because it's quite elegant and it keeps my wife happy. Now that's a benefit to me. It keeps the family stable.
Happy wife, happy life. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. Maybe one last question. What's the area that you're most interested in at the moment? What kind of things are you exploring and you think hold perhaps a lot of promise for the future?
Well, in terms of sort of sustainability, I'm extremely interested in how we shift business practice. I'm very, as I say, with whether it's racism, whether it's any form of sexism, whether it's any form of social inequality, you can't achieve what we want to do with those things alone. But it's a tough. And if we want to create a world, if we don't want our world to collapse, we've got to understand that we're heading towards a really, really tough time. And when you listen to Roger Hallam from Extinction Rebellion, for example, saying we're looking at billions of people dying, it's not implausible, he's right. So we actually have to step up in a different way now. We have to move beyond the sort of comfort of our academic propositions and our abstract ideas. And you have to move beyond our massive personal passions. And we've all got to think more systemically and more collaboratively. We have to understand what is it we need to do to change, and we have to be courageous in making those changes. And if because you're at the edge and you're on the fringe now, gang up with other people like that, and but maybe be ready to grow and change. That whatever you do, don't hold on to what you know now as thinking that's the answer. None of us know the answer. So all of us have got to work together and progress and learn. And it's that progressive learning that fascinates me. It's creating a movement of people who will be a movement of sort of understanders of what's going on in the world, and just really stop making false idols of super rich people or politicians or whatever. Think of our children and work together to make a decent world. We don't need that much in life to be happy, really. And a quality life is creating good things. And
sounds like an openness and a willing to explore things is quite a central dynamic to a lot of those things you explored. You know, being able to engage in a business strategy that you don't know all the outcomes and you got to consider all those variables and
yeah, we're guilty until proven innocent. So if you don't do it the classic way, you're a fringe person and you're being ever so brave. I think it's the other way around. I think we have no option but to observe and explore and be curious and experiment now. That's the only way forward. And the people who would pull us back from that are the ones who are the outliers now. So and you can't go and beat up people. You have to get inside people, change your perceptions, tell different stories about how the future can be, and get people to understand that we can move together. It's no good just fighting head on there. People just close up. We've got to be story makers. We've got to be visionaries, and you've got to be enormously brave. And because there's no option anymore.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for your time today, Jon. Pleasure talking with you.
Thanks.